all that for me? Good morning, peoples. Wow. Good morning, people.
Good morning.
Morning. So much more fun when you're up here and you look out and see these smiling faces on a Tuesday morning.
You don't smile for me, brother.
Huh?
I said, you don't smile for me today, brother.
No? Why?
Because I've been on this school.
That's a bad attitude, man.
You see,
Sorry, baby.
is him sleepy? Him sleepy?
He's got a cartoon shirt.
I don't have this coat.
It doesn't under.
No.
All right. Good morning. So let's. I will have those rubrics for you by tomorrow for your sermons. And we'll have the presentation dates, all that good stuff will be laid out for you. So I'll have that to you tomorrow, okay? Is that all right, Dylan? If you give me one more day on that. Anybody started yet? Anybody got their sermon in their mind, their topic in mind already?
I think I got this.
All right, like I said, I'll give y'all some benchmark dates along the way so that you can you'll be turning in your topic in advance, be turning in kind of a rough outline in advance, and I'll work with you through that process. We'll even take a day or two here and there to actually let you put those, work on those during class so that we can kind of interact. I'll come around the room and help you with whatever. Also, just as you're having questions and things, feel free just to continue to check in with me anytime you need to for preparation. Okay? I am happy to help with any of that, all right? Get your Bibles out. We're going to be in 3 different places in Psalms today. And I want to kind of make the connection between kind of what we've set up as we've begun to talk about how the moral universe points to a God who is holy. And remember we talked about watches. Huh? Right? And we made the connection that all pointed to a creator because all of those things were designed. Had a designer, and so it points to a greater connection to a creator. So today I want to kind of look at the overarching characteristics of God. Okay, so let's make sure we're writing these things down. How do we make this God connection here? Okay, I think there are 3 overarching characteristics that we want to understand about God. Number 1 is that He is a ruler. Number 2, that He is righteous. And number 3, that He is relational. Okay? So ruler, righteous, and relational. So which one of those 3 would relate to God's moral character? Righteous. Absolutely. Somebody, let me get a volunteer for Psalm 7:9. First hand. Who will read? All right, Khalil. Psalm 7:9. Read that for us. Let me get somebody else to look up Psalm 11:7. Who would do that one for me? All right, thank you, Erickson. Psalm 11:7 will be yours, sir. And then let me get somebody else, Psalm 119:7 through 9. Thank you, Gracie.
So Psalm what?
What did he say?
All right, so Khalil, you got Psalm 7:9. Erickson, you got 11:7. And Gracie, you got 119:7, 8, and 9.
11 verse 7.
Okay? All right, listen up. So we've said that if which of the R's relates to God's moral character, we said righteous. That is true. So now let's see if God's Word affirms that. All right, Khalil, hit us.
In the evil of those who are wicked and defend the righteous.
Is that all? Read it again, nice and loud.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Exactly.
In the evil of those who are wicked and defend the righteous, for you look deep within the mind and heart, O righteous God.
Okay. So you see the psalmist twice there in that verse refer to God directly as righteous, correct? All right, look at Psalm 11:7, Erickson.
For the righteousness, Lord loves justice, the virtuous will see His face.
Okay? All right, the virtuous will see His face. Some Bibles will say the upright will see His face, depending on which translation you're looking at. But there's also, I think, another side to God's righteousness. The following verses that Gracie's going to read for you, I want you to think about this in the context of living a moral life. Read this one for us, Gracie.
The teaching of the Lord are perfect. They give new strength. They make pain people wise. The orders of the Lord are right. They make people happy. The commands of the Lord are pure. They light up the way. Respect for the Lord is good. It will last forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are completely right.
Amen. So how does God's righteous law help us know how to live? Think about the context of the 3 different verses we've just read and answer that question for me. How does God's righteousness, the righteous law, help us know how to live? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller?
Because God knows what's best for us, I guess.
Okay. He knows what's best for you. Okay. All right. What would somebody add to that?
God teaches us what is right and wrong.
Okay. Which version did you read yours out of, Gracie? What translation is that?
NCB.
Okay. Check this out. Let me read this in another version for you as well, and maybe this helps bring some clarity to it. All right. He says, verse 7 says that as I learn your righteous regulations, I will thank you by living as I should. So saying thank you, being gracious, means doing what we're asked to do. We've heard the definition of being obedient. This is what I tell my 5-year-old all the time. Being obedient means doing what I'm told, when I am told, with the right heart spirit. Like mom and dad can tell you to do something and you don't want to do it, but you'll do it because mom and dad said to do it. But the whole time you're mumbling under your breath, you're kind of fussy about it, you're walking around your room cleaning stuff, you're kicking your clothes because you're mad. You know what I'm saying? Like we're not really being obedient. We're doing what they've asked us to do, but not really being obedient. We do the same thing with God. We'll do it because God says we're supposed to, but we're the whole time we're like, I can't believe this stupid guy, stupid rules. You know what I'm saying? Like we do things. But in verse 7, I think we're challenged that said, I will thank you by living as I should. It's a way to say, it's a way to show respect, it's a way to show honor by doing what we're asked to do.
Ms. Langford, can you come to the office, please? Ms. Langford, to the office. Thank you.
Even if we're not necessarily thrilled about what we're being asked to do. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So it's a way that we show reverence to the Lord by doing what He's asked us to do. Verse 8 says, I will obey your decrees. Please don't give up on them. You ever had a teacher or a coach, parent, somebody in authority in your life that you were just kind of like, don't give up on them? Like you sensed that they were getting to a point where they were kind of through with you? And you've cried out to someone, maybe not literally saying those words, but you've in your mind just been thinking, I hope they don't give up on me. Maybe a relationship of any sort where you're just like, don't give up on me. Right? How do we live when you have that type of desperation? If you knew that God was this close, Grace, to giving up on you, you think it would change the way you live?
Yes.
This means yes. Okay. Well, because God's not close to giving up on us, does that mean we take that for granted sometimes? Probably. We probably do. And then in verse 9, how can a young person stay pure? By obeying your word. If I want to stay pure, if I want to keep my purity intact as a young person, as a not so young person, if we want to keep our purity intact in our relationship with Christ, how do we do that? And he simply says, listen, understand that God is righteous, and so therefore do what He asks you to do. Does that make sense? There's a sentence below. I wish I had the ability. I started playing around with the thing this morning, but it's tough to have this on to where I'm writing something, but have the lights off so that because Anyway, you can't see this if the lights are on, but then it's so dark in here right now that you can't see your notes to write this. So I wish y'all had a way to do this, because this was really a neat thing. There was a sentence in my book that says that C.M. Joad was a seeker of truth who was studying human nature and came to realize that men were moral creatures, which led to his conclusion that there must be a God. And what was neat about that is there's a connection to make. Each sentence of that paragraph or that statement points to one of the worldviews that we've talked about. For example, it says that C.M. Joad was a seeker of truth. I want you to pause and think back to our 10 disciplines that make up our worldview. Okay? If you've got your notes out, you can even flip back to those if you want to, if you need the help. But we talked about the 10 disciplines that make up our worldview. So if I were to ask you, when it says that he was a seeker of truth, what does that speak to? Which one of those disciplines does that speak to? Grab your notes if you need to. What would we call somebody who's a seeker of truth? What's that called? Philosophy. Absolutely. This paragraph contains 4 different things. I thought it was really interesting. This one statement really speaks to 4 of those disciplines. A seeker of truth is someone who studies philosophy. Okay? What about who was studying human nature? That's the second part of the sentence. Who was studying human nature. What does that point to? What do you think, Kylie?
Psychology.
Psychology, absolutely. Studying human nature. Remember, we talked about human nature is kind of our internal who we are, right? It helps to understand why we do what we do, and that is all that psychology stuff. And then the third statement he said is there, and he came to realize that men were moral creatures.
Ethics.
Ethics, absolutely, Khalil. And then the last part of it was, which led to his conclusion that there must be a God.
Yeah.
Theology. Theology. In that one little statement there, I think Joad creates this connection to 4 of those disciplines, which further continues to help us understand how those disciplines will affect and impact your biblical worldview. So I hope you can see that connection. Someone can be seeking truth, which is philosophy, by studying human nature, which is psychology, and make observations about morality, which is ethics, and those will lead to a conclusion about the existence and nature of God, which is theology. Okay? So the Bible presents us this coherent way of understanding ourselves and understanding the world around us. Okay? So not only is God perfectly righteous in all his ways, but he distinguishes between good and evil in our behavior. Somebody pull up Proverbs 5, 21 and 23 for me. Or 21 through 23.
I got it.
You got it? Thank you, brother. Proverbs 5, 21 through 23. And I'm going to ask you to read along with Erickson in your Bible, because I'm going to ask you to kind of take a second on your notes there and write down an internal answer to a question. Okay? Proverbs 5, 21 through 23. You can read it when you're ready, Erickson.
For the Lord sees clearly that a man does examining every path he takes. An evil man is held captive by his own sins. They are ropes that catch and hold him. He will die for lack of self-control. He will be lost because of his great foolishness.
Okay? One version says his great stupidity. Anybody's Bible say that? Anybody's Bible in verse 23 say his great stupidity? Then one version does. So in your own words, I want you to kind of explain the principle from those verses. What's the principle? What's the point in that verse? I want you to take a second, just right there in your own notes. I want you to answer that for yourself. What's the principle from those verses? And then after you write the principle, tell me how that applies to you. Apply that to your life. that leads to the following. It is, right now it's Tuesday. How many of you your church has church on Wednesday night? All right, good. So pretty much everybody's. How many of you go on Wednesday night? Okay, so let's just assume Sunday, because I know everybody goes on Sunday, right? Or whatever your Sabbath day is, which might be Saturday for some of you. Everybody goes at least once a week. Let's just assume that to be true, okay? So here's what happens. This Sunday, you have a new neighbor in town, and you have been inviting him or her, whoever your new neighbor is, to come to church with you. And so this Sunday, they agreed. So they're going to church with you. Now, they've been rebutting you on this whole Jesus thing, wanting nothing to do with it. But they have finally decided, Tim, all right, I'm going. So in the car, after church, y'all do what any good church-going folk do, which is go out for lunch, right? After church on Sunday, it's what we do. So you go out for lunch, y'all are sitting at the table, and your neighbor says to you, Mackenzie, I have a quite different view of who this God guy is than you do. And he begins to give you this weird thing about, let's say it like this. Everything in the universe, the rocks, the trees, animals, the stars, the moon, is just part of a cosmic energy. Okay? And that that cosmic energy blends together and comprises God, little g. Looking at your notes from the last couple of days, what might we say to that? Yeah. She would have her worldview would be what? For those of you who were with me last year, if you're a freshman, this won't make any sense to you. Those of you who were with me last year, which worldview would she tend to be based on what she's just told you? Naturalist, that's right. She's a naturalist, okay? So that's her worldview. How do we begin to have a discussion or a dialogue with her about what we believe? Just think back to what we've just covered here in the last few days of material out of this. What might we be able to say to her? You're trying to point to her that God's a personal being, not an impersonal force. Tim?
That if that was the case, then there would be very few then there wouldn't really be any things that would be sacred or that would be sacred, and then everything would just be like, and that there probably wouldn't be as much of more necessary moral compass if that was the case.
Okay. All right. I think I see where you're trying to go. Now listen, she's just told you, Hannah, that her view is that God is not a being. It's comprised of all the stuff in earth. We know, if we're a Christian, we know that God is a personal being. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So how would we begin to have that conversation with this person to help them understand how we view God as a personal being and not just some inanimate object? How do we do that? Huh? How do we know that?
I mean, he got feelings that he cared about us. If that makes sense.
All right, let's think back to what we talked about. You and I we talked about watches, minds, and morals. What did all three of those things bring us back to, Ray Sean? Watches, minds, and morals all pointed to what? What did all three have in common? They all had a designer, was the word we used. My watch was designed by someone to make it all work and do what it's supposed to do. Your mind, we talked about it. Where does the thought of good and evil even come from in the first place? Your sense of your moral compass. Because even if you're not a Christian, you have an understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And that would even go beyond the laws of the land. You know how I know that? Because some of you do stuff that's illegal. So it's not even about the law of the land. You don't necessarily care.
about the law of the land? How many of us have driven too fast? Okay? So we are a bunch of lawbreakers. We already covered this whole thing about how we're all a bunch of liars and sinners and we're all evil people. We've all murdered. We've all committed adultery. We've all done all the bad stuff. So we've already established that none of us are good people. We've already established that. So where does the moral compass come from that everyone has intrinsically? And we talked about how it points to a creator. Something had to have created you knowing the difference between right and wrong. You don't have to be taught that murder is wrong to know that killing another person is wrong. And that, to me, singularly points to the fact that you were designed. So you have a creator, Tierra. You're not just coming out the womb. Why else would my 5-year-old go walking up to some kid and talking about, I'm going to cut your head off? So he doesn't think there would be anything wrong with that. But then as soon as I ask him about it, why do you think he feels remorseful? Because he got in trouble. And when he gets in trouble, he begins to realize what?
That he did something bad.
There is a difference between right and wrong. And sometimes just because I might think it's okay doesn't make it okay. And it's not that Dad says it's not okay, like life says it's not okay. It's not Dad's law. It's not like he's got a mean brute of a father who says, don't kill people. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so if we wanted to point to a designer, I think if we're talking to someone who's a naturalist, I can begin to have a conversation with them about their mind and the intricacy of how they were made points to a creator. And you could use watches. A watch has a designer. There's a particular order to it. It doesn't just exist. Does it make sense? This watch is made by, what's the name of the watch is not on here. But it's an Invicta is the brand. Not the brand, but the model. Bentley or one of those racing places out of Europe is who makes this watch. I can't remember. Okay? So it's an expensive watch. It didn't just come together because the guy who created it just said B. You understand what I'm saying? They had to have engineers and designers and all that other stuff to make it work, function, every little second hand to move, and mine's one of those that just flows on the second hand. But it has a designer to this watch. The watch you're wearing has a designer. It didn't just come. Does that make sense, Jillian? And so that points to a personal being, a designer, much like our morals, much like the rest of those things. So you just hit them with that. You say, you're thinking, hey, I did good. And she goes, well, that our minds are just part of this impersonal cosmic consciousness. What does that mean? Hey, listen, do you ever have somebody try to question you on your belief in God? Do you ever just stop and ask them to explain? It is so funny to me, personally. I love it. Okay, y'all know me. I like a little bit of confrontation, Trent. I love it when somebody starts telling me that, like, the whole God thing's a joke. I love those conversations. And I'll just begin to ask questions. You ever notice how you start asking somebody questions? Somebody's ever asked you a question, you know you're not right, but you just keep kind of digging deeper because you really want to make your point, even though you begin to realize, holy crap, my answer is stupid, but I'm trying to make sense of it. Some of you are chuckling, so you feel what I'm talking about. Like, you know you're not right, but you are determined. Like poor Evan is determined and convinced that Clemson's going to lose to Georgia Tech this Saturday. He knows in his heart he's crazy for that belief, but every time we talk about it, he just is like, he digs in a little deeper because he's like, no, it's going to happen. I'm 100% sure. He knows he's wrong, but he's really trying to hold on to it. You understand what I'm saying? I love having those kind of conversations with people, especially about religion, because you begin to ask them, okay, well, why do you believe that? That's a great question. Why do you believe that? And just listen. And then when they answer that, go, well, why do you believe that? It's awesome. It is so awesome. Because you get to the place where you get to understand who really believes what the heck they're saying. Why do you believe that's true? Have some fun with that. Have that conversation with people. Why do you believe that? Listen, have it with another Christian. Why do we really believe what we say we believe, Harrison? Why do we really believe that the God of the Bible is really the creator? Why do we really believe that if we should listen to anything in here, if we want to really have a good life? Because don't good things happen to people who aren't Christians?
Yes.
See? We start having that conversation even with a fellow Christian, you'll be amazed at what the conversation will turn into. All right? All right, what about this? What other line of evidence could you use to help her understand that God is real? So you hit them with the whole, we have a mind, therefore that points to a creator. She comes back and says, no, our minds are just part of this impersonal cosmic consciousness. What do you say to that? How about, why do you believe that? Get somebody to explain that. Why do you believe that? Right? All right. Curiosity. Anyone in here who might be bold and courageous enough to raise their hand and say, I'm not with this Jesus thing. I don't believe this stuff. I don't think this is real. Anybody that would be there. And it's okay if you're not, don't want to put you on the spot. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to say anything. So don't say anything. But is there anybody who might be willing to say, I'm not? And knowing that what it's going to mean is that you will get to be my guinea pig on some stuff. Not just in dialogue, although we will certainly do that back and forth. Okay? How many of you would say then, and I get it, how many of you might say, I believe in God, but I'm not really sure He's directly involved in my day-to-day life. What's that worldview called last year? There is a God,
Oh, thank you.
but He's not really involved in my day-to-day life.
I know.
It starts with a D.
It's not
Deism. Deism. There is a God, but He's not an intimate part of my day-to-day life. Okay? If you have a biblical worldview, you believe that He is. But there are a lot of people who believe in a God and believe in God, but don't think He's involved in their day-to-day life. Does that make sense, Emily? So anybody might say, I think I might be a deist. Okay? So we're all good Christian folk in here then, is what you're telling me. Okay? Good deal. If you decide that you would like to tell me differently, maybe after class, I would love the opportunity, just even if it's in a one-on-one. Man, let's have some dialogue about that. And I promise you that it is not my aim, nor is it ever my aim, to try to embarrass you or belittle you. It is simply going to ask you some questions and expect you to defend yourself, much like I would do somebody who claims to be a Christian but does nothing to live like it. And I would begin to ask them the same questions. Why do you do what you do, Hannah, if you proclaim to know Jesus? How can you do that? How can you think that that's okay when you claim to be a follower of Christ? Does that make sense, Tim Terry? So that's the kind of conversation that we will have. All right. What's karma?
Would you do something positive or negative or action, and then positive or negative or action against that?
So imagine that you just told her, okay, you kind of explained this whole thing that within the heart of every person there's a moral sense of right and wrong, and that means that if God is moral, and then you find that she actually begins to agree with you, sort of, then she hits you with the karma thing. She agrees that she's got to live a good life because she believes in karma. Now what? Come on, man, y'all are my biblical scholars.
That faith-
I just had everybody in the room tell me they have a biblical worldview and they love Jesus. So help me figure this out.
That faith is something that's more than deeds, more than words or deeds. It is in what you truly believe and what you do is and what you do in love your public and Christ.
Okay. What were you going to say? I think Erickson or Robbie, you had your hand up. Oh, go ahead. Great question. So if karma, like how do you know karma's real? Like have you ever met someone who goes, you know, in my previous life I was actually a dog, but I did really good and now I'm back and so I'm sitting in your Bible class. Have you ever,
But every
like
dog
listen,
does
why do we
good.
laugh? People believe that.
Every dog does good.
Oh, man.
She said every dog does good. So why we chuckle, but at the same time there are millions of people who believe in karma.
I mean,
So my question, I like what Robbie just asked. Say that question again, Robbie. Who determines what's good and evil? Who's the determiner of good and evil in the karma world? Because you and I already know that if it's left up to me and you, Evan, we will have a very twisted and perverted view of what's good. We'll make sure that it fits our narrative, not maybe our neighbors. Is that fair?
You can't, your creator cannot be God if you think
I agree. All right.